Okay, then we will start today our discussing materials. Okay, in the last two classes we have already discussed about two blocks. The first block was telling about the ancient and medieval societies. The second block was telling about Bronze Age civilization. Then today we are going to discuss about the third block, and the third block is telling about formation of state and empires. Okay, it has four units. The first unit is telling formation of states and empires, a general introduction. And the second unit is telling about the Persian Empire. And the third unit is telling about ancient Greece. And the last unit is telling about the Roman Empire. Okay. So let me talk about the first unit of this third block, formation of state and empires, a general introduction. This is very good topic. This is very important to tell. In this unit, we will discuss the changes and developments in adjoining regions of Mesopotamia in the subsequent centuries. In the first millennium BC, new empires and states emerged not only in Asia but in other parts of the world also. From this unit, we will know also the formation of states and empires in West Asia region and establishment of the Persian Empire. Few backgrounds are here to the emergence of empires. With the growth of Bronze Age technology, both Egypt and Mesopotamia had established relationship of exchange with those parts of West Asia which could regularly supply goods such as metal, especially copper, tin, gold, and silver, and wood, which were in short supply in these two centers of civilization. This relationship led to contacts with the less advanced communities which lived on the margins of settled agrarian societies. The existence of colonies of Mesopotamia, merchants in central Anatolia who were involved in this trade. So the Anatolia became the home of another great Bronze Age civilization. So the influence of Mesopotamia and Egypt acted as a catalyst for the development of neighboring areas. What are the position of tribal during that time? Tribal migration was there because the second half of the third millennium BC, 2500 to 2000 BC, was a period of large scale tribal migration throughout most of the West Asia and the eastern part of the Central Asia. Numerous tribes and ethnic and linguistic groups were on the move. Some of these groups were nomads in search of better means of subsistence or were looking for fresh pastures for their animal herds. Many were dislocated by other tribal groups and several were pushed out of their original inhabitations due to the pressure of settled agrarian societies. This process continued with great intensity for nearly 1500 years and brought about many changes in West Asia, Egypt, and the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean zone. So, how the state formation has possible? Social differentiation and state formation among the tribes led to the emergence of a large number of new states in northern Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, Anatolia, and the eastern Mediterranean, and later in Iran. The new ethnic groups formed a major component of the ruling classes of these states. These states borrowed several features of Egyptian and Mesopotamia civilization, such as writing, military techniques, and administrative organization. So here we will discuss about the emergence of empires. Few empires has emerged here. The new type of state, which may loosely be referred to as an empire, began to emerge initially in West Asia from around 1800 BC onwards. As a type of state, the empire encompassed a fairly large territory which was not confined to a given geographical zone, was usually monarchical and extensive military resources, and was based on the collection of a large tribute. Every empire had a core area as its political center, and the ruling class of the empire belonged overwhelming to this core area. An empire was a geographically extensive entity which brought together diverse peoples and communities within a single unified political unit. Here, few empires had emerged. I have already taken the name of the two empires. Empires were the result of military conquest carried out over an extended period. It was through conquest that the ruling elite of an area could establish its domination over other areas. From around 1800 BC onwards, we find a number of states located in West Asia attempting to build of large empires. Initially, the Babylonian state and the Assyrian state in Mesopotamia civilization. The Babylonian Empire. It was under the first dynasty of Babylon that Mesopotamia became a great power in West Asia. As I told you yesterday class, the Mesopotamia constitutes three main civilizations: Babylonio, Sumerio, Babylonio and Assyrio. Okay, right now we are discussing about Babylonio. This dynasty was founded by Sumu Abum, 1894 to 1881 BC, the time. The sixth ruler of the dynasty, the famous Hammurabi. The famous Hammurabi unified southern Mesopotamia and then extended his control over large parts of northern Mesopotamia. Hammurabi created an empire, and his successor, Samsu Iluna, expanded the empire by adding new territories. This empire is usually referred to as the Old Babylonian Empire, although the empire began to decline after Samsu Iluna. Henceforth, Babylon was to remain the main political center of southern Mesopotamia. The Amorites, who were placed in the large group of tribes called Western Semites, played a crucial role of developing the old Babylonian Empire. Akkadian became the official language of the empire. Akkadian was the official language of the empire and continued to be the main language of Mesopotamia for many centuries. As has already been mentioned, the old Babylonian Empire eventually collapsed as a result of Hittite raids, which was happened during 16th century BC. Soon afterwards, another tribal people, the Kassites, known as Kansu, who certainly included an Indo-European component, established themselves as a rulers of Mesopotamia. Then we will talk about little bit about Assyrian Empire after Babylonian. Around 1350 BC, a significant new development took place in northern Mesopotamia. Okay, thus the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian peoples covered the southern part of Mesopotamia. Then the Assyrian Empire peoples, the Assyrian peoples covered the northern part of Mesopotamia. Okay. This was the rise of Assyrian, which was to have a profound impact on the history of West Asia. The Assyrians founded a vast empire which dominated West Asia for several centuries. We may say that it was the Assyrian who really inaugurated the age of empires. The Assyrian peoples are very strong, they have very good knowledge, and they had very capacity to control the all regions. During the course of the tribal movements which we have referred to above, numerous Semitic groups had moved into the occupied northern Mesopotamia. Some of the groups which settled in the upper Tigris area came to be known as Assyrians. The people whom we refer to as Assyrians consisted of Semitic immigrants and the original inhabitants of the area. They got their name from Assur, the main god worshipped by them. They worshipped the god like Assur. Territorial expansion is also an important part of this unit. The Assyrian state rose to prominence following the end of the Mitannian domination over northern Mesopotamia. Having brought most of the upper Tigris area under their rule by about 1300 BC, the Assyrians began to expand westwards into Syria under King Salmanasar I. The Assyrians enlarged and consolidated their power under the successes of Salmanasar I. Eventually, the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I conquered Syria. Okay, Tiglath-Pileser I was very powerful ruler of Assyrian Empire. Eventually, the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I conquered Syria, extracted tribute from Phoenician cities on the Lebanese coast, and subjugated Babylon, thereby making Assyria a great power in West Asia. This was the first phase of the rise of Assyrian Empire. And the newly created Assyrian Empire was disrupted by fresh tribal incursions during the 10th century, but had recovered by about 900 BC. From 900 BC onwards, the Assyrians steadily expanded their influence and established the new Assyrian Empire. The real founder of the new Assyrian Empire was Assurbanipal II, and he attempted to restore the Assyrian Empire to the size that it had attained under Tiglath-Pileser I. Okay, he consolidated Assyrian hold over northern Mesopotamia and undertook several military campaigns into Syria. And he built a capital near Assur. He was succeeded by his son Salmanasar III. Salmanasar III carried out numerous campaigns in Armenia, Syria, Palestine, and the areas lying along the Persian Gulf. So in this way, the Tiglath-Pileser III succeeded in annexing Syria and large part of the Palestine to the Assyrian Empire. So Tiglath-Pileser III created vast empire extending from the Mediterranean coast to the Caspian Sea and from the Taurus and Zagros mountains to the Persian Gulf. If we will discuss after the discussion of Babylonian and Assyrian Empire and the territorial expansion, it is very important to discuss about the administrative and military approaches. What was the condition of administrative and military condition of there? Tiglath-Pileser III was instrumental in developing an elaborate administrative and military approaches for the Assyrian Empire. This stabilized the empire for nearly a century. An important objective of Tiglath-Pileser III was to centralize the structure of the Assyrian state and strengthen monarchical authority. The conquered territories were constituted into administrative districts. These units or districts were placed under governors who were directly answerable to the king. The governors had extensive administrative, financial, judicial, and of course military authority in their respective areas. They were also responsible for the collection of taxes and the regular flow of tribute to the center. Further, they were expected to mobilize troops for the Assyrian army. Therefore, Tiglath-Pileser III was initiated a ruthless policy of large-scale transfers of population from one part of the empire to another as a strategy to minimize the possibilities of rebellion within the empire. And he laid the foundation of a powerful empire, and his Sarjonid successors continued with his tradition. Then if we will discuss about the migration and conflicts and new phase of empire building, a new phase of empire building began in the mid 7th century BC in West Asia with the rise of Median Empire, which was succeeded by the much larger Achaemenid Empire. The core areas of these empires were located in Iran. As a result of several centuries of tribal migrations of large number of new tribes, especially those belonging to the Indo-Iranian or Indo-Aryan branch of the Indo-European people, moved into Iran in the latter half of the second millennium BC. Many of the Iranian tribes had given up their nomadic lifestyle and adopted a sedentary existence. Different parts of the Iran came to be associated with specific tribal groups. The Iranians succeeded in exploiting the natural resources of the region more efficiently than earlier settlers and developed a new pattern of subsistence based upon specialized animal husbandry and better utilization of water resources. And the construction of such network required greater cooperation within and among the agrarian communities, which in turn led to the growth of a more complex social and economic organization. And towards the end of the 8th century BC, the Median tribes settled in this area were living in fortified villages, some of which subsequently developed into urban centers. Yes, for the invasion of Assyrian, the Medes allied themselves with Babylonia. Assyrian authority over Babylonia had weakened under the later Sarjonids, and the Babylonians asserted in independence. This was the time when a new dynasty rose to prominence in southern Mesopotamia. So, in this way, the significant political changes were taking place within the Median Empire at this time. Astyages had expanded the empire, but he was facing internal problems due to some regions, few regions, some internal problems. For reasons which are not very clear, a section of the Median aristocracy had become hostile to the Median king and plotted to overthrow him. So, in the mid 6th century BC, Achaemenids under Cyrus revolted against the Medes. In this, they had supported of the section of the Median aristocracy, which was opposed to Astyages. Cyrus defeated Astyages and occupied the Median capital. This brought the Median Empire to an end, and the territories ruled by the Medes now came under the Achaemenids' rule. So, this Assyrian Empire and before that the Babylonian Empire, this both empire has shown the real power for the controlling of their own areas through the territorial expansion and the administrative and military powers, then they became very strong. Though sometimes the migrations has been occurred, though sometimes the conflicts and new phase of empire buildings, apart from that, they have done very good life for their making good civilization, for their making good life, for having good subsistences. So in this way, the the third block, the first unit, the formation of states and empires has been finished. If we will go to second unit, the Persian Empire, the Persian Empire, this is also an important part of this block, the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, basically, we will discuss the expansion and consolidation of the empire by Cyrus, Cambyses, Cambyses, and Darius I. These two rulers were very powerful. Okay, modern Iran, we are looking in Asia, the Iran, modern Iran was called Persis by the ancient Greeks. Okay, in this unit, we will discuss some of the salient feature of this empire, the expansion and consolidation of this biggest empire of the region was accomplished in a span of 50 years. The administrative approaches and the system of control on the extensive territories was one of the major achievements. This was achieved through developing a mechanism of decentralized governments. We will study the growth of language, means of communications, and development of common language. These are the main focus of this unit. Okay, we will also discuss growth of new religion, tradition of religious tolerance, and unique achievement. Okay, firstly, we will give our attention to the expansion and consolidation of the empire, how this empire has expanded and how it has consolidated. The territorial expansion and consolidation of the Persian Empire was accomplished in more than 50 years. A number of rulers contributed in the whole process. I have already told you the three rulers, name is Cyrus and Cambyses and Darius I. Okay, and simultaneously we will also discuss about their nature, about their achievement also. Okay, however, Cyrus the Great and Darius I stand out as the key figures in the process of expansion and the consolidation. And we will discuss the achievements of Cyrus little bit. Cyrus combined in his person the unified kingship of the Median and Persian tribal confederacies. Simultaneously, the state became more centralized and monarchy as an institution became more powerful. Under him, the empire became more powerful, having stabilized also. His position immediately embarked upon an ambitious program of expansion. Okay, Cyrus first concentrated on the conquest of Anatolia. He, give, he gave his first knowledge how the Anatolia will be occupied by him. So Cyrus first tried to persuade the Ionians to revolt against Lydia. The next phase of expansion resulted in the conquest of Mesopotamia. We have already referred to the decline of the new Babylonian empires under the successors. Okay, so Babylonian was invaded and captured by Cyrus in 539 BC. Babylonian empire was captured by Cyrus in 539 BC. If we will talk about Cambyses after Cyrus, then he has also taken very good place in this empire. Cyrus died in 529 BC while on a military expedition. He was succeeded by his son Cambyses. Not much known about the brief reign of Cambyses except that he was mainly preoccupied with campaigns in Egypt. Under him, Egypt was added to the empire, and he invaded Egypt 525 BC and quickly defeated the Egyptian ruler Pashmet. Cambyses are highly prejudiced and they portray him as a mad and tyrannical ruler who had no respect for Egyptian tradition. He took over the throne as a traditional Egyptian ruler and he adopted the symbols associated with the paraphos of order to legitimize his authority. He also supposed to have undertaken a series of military expeditions into some of the areas surrounding Egypt proper. He died in 522 BC while still in the midst of dealing with the upheaval. Then again one more person is coming after the dying of Darius I, Cambyses. Then Darius I is coming after him. Then he had very good power for control his empire. If we will talk about his time, then time is 522 to 486 BC. His time was the son of Hystapes, who was a leading Persian official, probably a provincial governor. Darius I was the most outstanding of the Achaemenid rulers. Under him, the extensive territories acquired by Cyrus and Cambyses were systematically organized to create a stable empire. Till about 519 BC, Darius was engaged in restoring order and resisting Achaemenid authority in regions which were in rebellion. Darius continued the process of expansion both in the east and the west. In the east, the empire extended up to the Hindu Kush mountains. He was very strong ruler. Under the guidance of the administration was very strong, and when he was guided to his empire, the west side, west side and east side was very strong. So that I told you, Darius continued the process of expansions both in the east and the west. In the east, the empire extended up to Hindu Kush mountains, and of course, if we will see the west part, a large part of the Aegean Sea and perhaps Thrace came under the Persian control. So under him, the east and west were under him very strongly. Darius also carried out campaign in the Greek peninsula. He himself has left behind a record of the opening years of the reign in the form of large triangular inscriptions scraped on the face of a cliff of Behistun in western Iran. This inscription, known as Behistun inscriptions, is in the Old Persian. So after lots of achievements of Darius I, then in 486 BC he died and he was succeeded by Scares I. What was the condition of administrative and reorganization? So administrative reorganization during this time, especially under rule of Darius I, the Persian Empire was largest empire of the period. Its territorial expansion included Asia Minor, Armenia, Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, and the northern part of Arabia, Afghanistan, Turkestan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, etc. His lasting achievements was reorganization of the Achaemenid Empire. He welded into a compact political unit the far-flung territories inherited by him. A regular system of tribute realization was instituted over the ensure sufficient resources for supporting the centralized administrative structure of the state and a large army. So he was always trying how their armies will be strong and how their army will do lots of good work. So powerful monarchical state emerged under the Darius with a vast amount of wealth concentrated in the hands of a very small ruling elite. This elite was increasingly drawn from prominent Persian families who now completely monopolized political power, at least at the central level. So some Greek text use the term satrapi. Uh, Satrapi, basically it's a Persian province. Darius I made satrapis the basic unit of administration at the provincial level. A satrap could be a semi-autonomous provincial ruler or a high official appointed by the king. Based on inscriptions has given few statements about list of 23 satrapies. As has been pointed out, some of these satrapies were already established prior to Darius. If we will talk about the kings had special official to keep a vigil called listeners, the ears of the king. They sent reports from the provinces. Basically vigil. Vigil basically they were doing as a work of reporter. Okay. And they are sending message to the king. Whatever the important events happened anywhere, they were sending the message to the king. They send reports from the provinces. The satraps were to look after local administration, maintain law and order, and contingents of army. The large size of satrapies at times made satraps powerful and encouraged them to rebel. The organization of a powerful army also provided the king which was striking capability and help in suppressing the rebellions. The empire was territorially too large to be efficiently governed from a single fixed capital. The king usually found it necessary to move one major administrative center to another. Darius built a large palace at Susa. In the following centuries, the city was the normal recognized center of the government. The city primarily served a ceremonial purposes. The Achaemenid rulers were buried near Persepolis at a place called Nakas-i-Rustam. Then after this, if we will discuss about the system of coinage, what type of coin, the system of coinage, then we will know the Persian Empire, how they were strong, especially on coinage. Darius introduced a uniform coinage, standardized weights, and it has some measure, okay, and prominent a new script to make the empire more cohesive. A uniform coinage with a high level of metallic purity promotes economic activities and exchange. At the same time, circulation of this currency over a wide area is an assertion of political authority. Issuing of coins by the state implied stamping pieces of precious metal with symbols that signified the authority of the government and guaranteed the value of each pieces. Silver was the main standard for worth. There were lots of coins were there, but silver was the main standard for worth. The metal was used for exchange without being coined. Fine silver was simply weighed for the purpose of exchange. Then coin was innovation which was Achaemenids borrowed from the Lydians. Both after silver, both gold, of course gold and silver coins were used and that the state established a fixed exchange rate between the two. It was under Darius that coins of a different designs began to be issued, both in silver and gold coins. The silver coins were known to the Greeks as siglos from the sequent shekel. In other parts of the empire, uncoined precious metal remained the medium of exchange. The standardization of coins, weights, and measures helped the trading activities. So these are the contribution of coins in Persian Empire. If we will go to language and communication, then also we will know about their language. Basically, in order to rule over the empire, inhabited by some many different linguistic groups. Basically, the Archimedes needed a evolve a linked language which would facilitate a communication. Darius actively pursued a policy for encouraging the development of such a linked language. It is generally recognized that the most widely spoken language of the empire was Aramaic. Aramic. Aramic was originally spoken by some of the tribes living northern Mesopotamia. Aramic was very important language there, and it was used by the northern Mesopotamia peoples. Aramic had emerged as the main language of trade in West Asia. It was also used in trade, this language. The main the main language of official document, it was also main language of the official documented and day-to-day imperial communication. The Aramic script was sometimes also used for writing Old Persian. Several other languages like Elamite, Babylonian, Egyptian, etc. used for official purposes, of which the trilingual based on inscriptions. If we will talk about religion, then we will know that Zoroastrianism had become the dominant creed of the Persian elite. The religious traditions of the several communities which inhabited the empire continued to thrive. Cyrus definitely seems to have protected local cults as it approaches, apparent from the support to the Jews. Personally, Cyrus might have accepted some Zoroastrian rituals, but we have little information on this point because it is certain that under Darius, Zoroastrianism had come to occupy a prominent place in the religious life and Persian ruling classes. So Darius usually projected himself as a worshipper of patronized some of ancient Iranian cults as well. However, the religious outlook of the Achaemenid state remained remarkably ended, and after that, after the religion, then this empire has become declined. Decline of the empire due to some reason. The Achaemenid empire flourished for more than 200 years with minor ups and downs. Every time a ruler died, there was some sort of upheaval in different satrapies. The biggest blow came in the form of the attack of Alexander. Okay, and to end this result invasion, the Persian territories by Alexander the Great. At this time, the Darius III came to take the power. After that, no successor was there for taking that empire as a whole. So, the consequences of this conquest will be discussed the next unit in the context of the history of ancient Greece. In this way, this unit has also finished, and now we will talk about the ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, basically, it has many important aspects. Basically, we will talk about geographical features, then a few civilization in Greek like Minoan civilization, the Mycenaean civilization, and of course the Dark Age. Okay, so if we will talk about the civilization, then 500 BC marks the beginning of the classical age of Greece, basically the most glorious phase of ancient Greek civilization. The classical age, yes, the classical age represented the culmination of the long historical process during which the foundation of Greek civilization were laid. By about 2000 BC, the large island of Crete in Greece had emerged as the center of the first Bronze Age civilization in Europe. This was the Minoan civilization which flourished between 2000 and 1400 BC. And in our discussion, we will definitely talk about the familiarize with the geographical spread of the Greek civilization, geographical phase, the background of ancient Greece. That is very important to talk about geographical situation of the Greek civilization. This would be followed by a chronological development of Greek civilization. This has been divided in two major sections. The first one is the early Greek civilization, and the second one is archaic and classical period. Yes, the former has three main epochs: the Minoan civilization, then Mycenaean civilization, and of course the Dark Age. The geographical features it's telling about the Greek civilization. Basically, the ancient Greece, we are referring to an area that was much larger than the present day state of Greece. The Greek world in antiquity encompassed western Anatolia, Thrace, the islands of the Aegean Sea, Crete and Cyprus, mainland Greece, southern Italy, and also Sicily. The early Greek civilization. We will discuss about the early Greek civilization. The early Greek civilizations would be discussed in three parts. As I told you, the three phases. One phase is going to the Minoan civilization. Second phase is going to Mycenaean civilization, and third phase is going to Dark Age. The Minoan civilization can be considered as the first Bronze Age civilization of this region, and the civilization emerged towards the end of the third millennium BC. And the third millennium BC and flourished till around 1400 BC. The civilization came to light in the early 20th century through the efforts of Sir Arthur Evans, who conducted the diggings in the region. This was named after the legendary king Minos of the Crete mythology. This was named after the legendary king Minos of the Crete mythology, and besides being centers of political authority, the places were also centers of economic activity. Then of course the second thing is going the sheep rearing and wool production. Basically, few important things of Minoan civilization about I'm going to tell sheep rearing, wool production were main produce of rural economy. Wheat, grapes, olives were main agricultural products. The goods were brought from rural areas to the cities for redistribution and trade. It seems that the Minoans had trading links with Egypt, Anatolia, and Levante's coast. The Minoan civilization of Crete came to an end about 1400 BC. Then after this civilization, then Mycenaean civilization came to the take the power. This civilization was a product of mainland of Greece. This civilization also flourished between 1600 BC and 1200, came to light as a result of the pioneering exhibition of Heinrich Schliemann. The civilization is named after the site of Mycenaean, and Mycenaeans, we are not referring to a single political entity but several distinct settlements which formed separate states. These states were ruled by warriors chief. The chiefs usually bore the royal title Wangs or Angs and ruled over the territories, both fortified palace complexes which dominated the Mycenaean urban centers. A powerful warriors aristocracy and an elaborate bureaucracy constituted the ruling elite, and the bureaucracy regulated virtually every aspect of the economy. The Mycenaeans had an extensive foreign trade. Basically, the goods like oil, pottery, textiles were their main exports. And sometimes they imported few goods like gold, copper, and also tin. Society was highly stratified, with the ruling elite having access to a large surplus. So, the Mycenaeans have left behind abundant written records which provide us with detail about the role played by the palaces in the economy. Mycenaeans evolved a script which is referred to as the Linear B script. The Linear B script was deciphered in 1952 by Michael Ventris, and he found that the language of the script was an early version of the Greek language. The Linear B records that have survived the mainly in the form of clay tablets. These are the sources. Then we came to know about the civilization details. They are invariably inventors or accounts and contain no references to political history and religious practice. These accounts has not given much information about the political history and religious practices. So the Mycenaean civilization ended during 1200 BC. After these two phases, then we are going to third phase, and that third phase is called the Dark Age. The Dark Age lasted for nearly 4 centuries, coming to an end in 800 BC. The significance of this date is that around this time, two great Greek epics, Iliad and Odyssey, were written. Their composition is attributed to a poet by their name of Homer. These epics mark a turning point in Greek history. Then, apart from their great literary merit, these epics are a very rich historical sources. The two works are part of the tradition of epic poetry. The main theme of Iliad as the war of coalition of Greek states against the state of Troy. Odyssey also given some important things. Odyssey recounts the adventures encountered by Odysseus, one of the heroes of the war, on his homeland journey after the conclusion of the campaign. The epics gives us some idea about the various aspects of contemporary religion, mythology, beliefs, food habits, and also some dress materials. Now the historians has given few things how they have divided the dark age into two sub periods. The third phase is called dark age, and it has two sub periods. One is 1200 to 1050 BC, and the second one is 1050 BC to 800 BC. In the first sub period, Mycenaean urban centers declined, and there are signs of extensive depopulation. The archaeological evidence reveals a sharp decline in population between 1300 and 1100 BC. Settlements are fewer and the smaller in size. Tribal migrants, at times violent, were also taking place in this period. So, the Mycenaean economy based on centralized regulation by the palace bureaucracy collapsed around 1200 BC. A little before 1000 BC, a new economy and social structure began to emerge in Greece. By this time, tribal migrations had resulted in Greek-speaking people occupying the entire peninsula. That means Iliad and Odyssey has given lots of information about this empire, about this basically the Dark Age. Okay. Then, simultaneously, these things has happened. There were three major dialects. One is Ionic, which included the subdialect and is significant from the 1000 BC onwards. The introduction of iron offered a viable alternative since Greece has adequate deposits of iron ore, and the Greek states with their limited resources would have preferred the use of this metal. And the end of the Dark Age saw the revival of writing in Greece. The end of the Dark Age, obviously, telling about the revival of the writing in Greece. We have seen that the linear B script had already disappeared with the collapse of Mycenaean civilization. It was collapsed because that civilization was lost. Then we will talk about the Archaic and Classical period. The period following the Dark Age. After the Dark Age, then these periods are coming. The period following the Dark Age is referred to as Archaic period. The time is called like 800 to 500 BC. The foundation of classical Greek civilization were laid in this period. The period from 500 BC to 338 BC is generally referred as a classical age of Greece. Some prominent changes take place in Archaic and Classical period and need specific discussion. However, the division into these two periods is not always very sharp. There is lot of overlapping and continuity in various aspects of society, economy, and also culture. Few things has already come to this time, that is the conflict of landed aristocracy and peasantry, and few reforms has been started right now. If I will talk about the Archaic period, then witness an intense conflict between the landed aristocracy and the peasantry throughout Greece. The origins of this struggle may be traced to the latter half of the Dark Age, when historical changes had placed landowning aristocrats in a strong position. Between century 800 to 600 BC, the landed aristocracy consolidated its hold over land and the political structures of the Greek states. This led to the impoverishment of the small landholders. In their desperations, the small landholders put up a tough fight against the aristocracy. So landholders and the aristocracy, they both have struggled each other. The constant upheavals caused by the struggle reached a point of crisis by 600 BC. In 594 BC, the Athenians resorted to the solution of nominating an arbitrator named Solon. These persons, Solon, Draco, and Pisistratus, these three persons in this empire has done lots of good work, lots of good reforms. Basically, the Solon, the most radical reforms of Solon was the abolition of debt bondage. This had emerged as one of the most serious problems faced by the peasantry. Impoverished peasants who often had marched holding located in difficult terrain such as hillsides. Solon did not carry out redistribution of land. He did, however, introduce changes in the political system. He was always interested to changes the political system of his time. So, the political system which gave ordinary Athenians to the right to participate in government. Not surprisingly, there were fresh upheavals in Athens within a few decades of Solon's reforms. Similar conditions prevailed in other states where incomplete reforms or no reforms had taken place. In these disturbed conditions, some political leaders carried out a series of coups and assumed dictatorial powers in their respective states. This development completely alerted the nature of governments. And of course, first attempt of seize of power 561 BC, but was unsuccessful and led to a flee from the city. What was emerging was a new form of government for which contemporaries use the term tyrant. Rulers like Pisistratus, who had offshore power in this manner, were called tyrants. The policy pursued by Pisistratus had a twofold outcome. Pisistratus, like Draco, Solon, and Draco, he was also had a good importance to this civilization. Second, the monopoly of entrance landed aristocracy over the political structure was broken. So, Pisistratus died in 527 BC and he was succeeded by his son Hippias. Then we will go to transition to democracy. In this classical period and subsequently, the Greek referred to the age of tyranny with intense dislike. Yet, it should be borne in mind that tyranny is period of the transition from oligarchical rule to democracy. The tyrants were instrumental in doing away with traditional hereditary basis of political power. The Greek aristocrats were close-knit hereditary elites. They enjoyed power not merely because of their wealth, but more significantly by virtue of their birth. Okay, the aristocratic families automatically held all executive, judicial, and military positions. That is why we refer to the political structure of the Greek states during the archaic period is being oligarchic in nature. The tyrants struck at the roots of this oligarchical control, thereby creating conditions for the transition of democracy. Even though the degree of democratization varied from state to state, it would not be incorrect to say that in Greece, by the beginning of the classical period, common people participated in the political process to much greater degree than that we find in other contemporary societies. So this was the fundamentally new system of government, especially for societies with the class differentiation. Police was the term most frequently used to denote those political entities in ancient Greece which had some aspects of democratic functioning. The police was territorially a small political entity. The concept of citizenship was a restricted one. Only the indigenous native residents of a polis were recognized as citizens. Basically, the citizens of the Greek polis could exercise their right to participate and vote in the assembly, which was the basic right of citizenship, by personally attending the meeting of assembly. One had to actually go to the meetings of the assembly, usually held in some open space in the city center, in order to exercise this right. Such a conception of democracy would have been unworkable if the respective Greek states possess a big area or a large population. The actual task, the actual task of governments was carried out through a smaller body, the council. With the decline of monarchy, real power had passed into the hands of oligarchical and councils of dominated by the hereditary landed elites. Then the council was very powerful body. After this, then we will discuss about the council. The council was a very powerful body in most states, and though in many cases in membership was monopolized by the landed aristocracy, yet at least at Athens, it had become genuinely representative by 500 BC. Athens has a special significance in any discussion on Greek democracy due to the scope of its accomplishment. So, moreover, our knowledge about the political structure of Athens is more extensive than that of other states. It may be stated at the outset that terms of the development of its democratic structure. Then Solon divided the Athenian citizens into four classes. Basically, the property or wealth possessed by the citizen determined the class in which he was placed. After the overthrow of Hippias in 510 BC, the political structure was further reformed. The crucial democratic reforms at the beginning of the classical period are attributed to Cleisthenes. Sometimes the conflict with Persia has occurred during this time. Formation of Delian League. Okay, the Athenians had built a strong navy which played a leading role in the conflict with Persia. Whereas the decisive battles of Salamis and Plataeus had halted the Persian advance into the Aegean Sea. Basically, no state had the capacity to fight the Persians entirely on its own. On the Peloponnese, there was a strong military alliance under the leadership of Sparta. It was as a solution to this problem that Athens, after Salamis and Plataea, took the initiative to form a confederation of states under its own leadership. And this confederacy has come to be known as Delian League. Okay, the Delian League derives its name from the island of Delos, where the common treasury of the confederacy was located, and this league gradually became an empire ruled by the Athenians. Then democratic political structure and emergence of Dim. The 100 years between the overthrow of Hippias, the defeat of Athens in the Peloponnesian War, witnessed the growth of a highly evolved democratic political structure at Athens. The primary unit of the democratic structure established by Cleisthenes was the deme. Every citizen was first and foremost a member of the particular deme. The deme was the smallest geographical unit. Then we will discuss about slave labor. Slave labor. A distinctive feature of ancient Greek civilization was the widespread use of slave labor in various sectors of the economy. There is evidence of the presence of large numbers of slaves in other ancient civilizations also, such as those of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Hittites. The Mesopotamia and Hittites law codes indicate the institutionalized slavery existed in this civilization. However, the scale of slavery was qualitatively different in ancient Greece. Here, for the first time in history, slave labor was used extensively for production. The initial pool of slaves was formed of prisoners of war. Archaic and classical period, slaves were to be found in every sector of production, especially in mining, handicrafts, and also agriculture. Some historians are also referred the role of slavery in Greek agriculture has been exaggerated, and that the agrarian economy depends mainly on the peasantry and free labor. At the end of the Dark Age, Sparta was already using slave labor on a scale that was unprecedented. In Athens, slaves were mostly privately owned. These slaves were regarded as property. In Athens, the slaves were regarded as property and bought and sold in the market as commodities. The prosperity of Athens during the classical period rested on the expansion of slave labor. Historians have offered figures for Athenian slaves during the 5th century BC, ranging from 60,000 to 1,10,000. It has been estimated that of these, nearly 20,000 to 30,000 worked in the Athenian silver mines. Then we will discuss about the development of philosophical thought. Basically, the philosophical thought was there. The ancient Greece may be credited by very rich intellectual contribution. Due to constraints of space, it would not be possible for us to go into details. So, history, philosophy, mathematics, medicine were some of the main areas influenced by the ideas of the Greek thinkers. The developments of democratic traditions in Greece helped in creating an environment conducive to intellectual discourse and growth. Herodotus is called the father of history for giving its a distinct identity as a branch of knowledge. History, which was treated as a mix of facts, fiction, myths, legends, fables, and anecdotes, etc. So, like Herodotus, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle considered as the most towering thinkers of the classical Greek philosophy. Okay, the end of the classical period. The classical period came to an end 338 BC when the Macedonians subjugated the police of the Greek peninsula and the Aegean Sea. So, After the discussing of these philosophical thinkers like Herodotus and Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, then it is finished now. Then we will go to last units, that is the Roman Empire. This unit has also many important phases: the Roman expansion, the political structure and society. It has some conflicts and also expansion. If we will talk about the end of the Persian Empire, the last phase of the Persian Empire, the end of the Persian Empire, with the disruption of the unity of Alexander's Macedonian Empire, a new political entity rose to prominence in the Mediterranean region. This was the Roman Empire, which became the largest and most enduring empire. The nucleus of the empire lay in Italy, and subsequently it encompassed the entire Mediterranean world. Roman expansion into the Mediterranean began soon after the breakup of the Macedonian Empire. By this time, the city of Rome in Italy had succeeded in bringing almost the entire Italian peninsula under its control. If we will talk about the Roman expansion, then we will see the Roman Republic lasted around 500 years, from 510 to 27 BC. It was during this period that the city-state grew into a huge and powerful empire. The growth came through series of wars and also conflicts. The expansion was achieved over a long period time in two distinct phases: the first phase and of course the second phase. In the first phase of its expansion, Rome was engaged in bringing the entire Italian peninsula under its control. This phase lasted for more than 2 centuries, from the 500 to 280 BC. Rome began by establishing its supremacy over central Italy also. Having brought most of the central Italy under its rule, by 295 BC, Rome turned its attention to southern Italy. Now, Rome turned its attention to southern Italy. At the end of this phase, the entire peninsula was directly or indirectly subject to Rome. If we will talk about the second phase, then second phase of expansion, the objective of which was to extend Roman influence to the Mediterranean. The wars between Rome and Carthage are known as the Punic Wars. The history has seen 3 Punic Wars. There were 3 Punic Wars. First Punic War was happened 264 to 241 BC. Second Punic War 218 to 201 BC, and the third Punic War 149 to 146 BC. By the end of the third Punic War, the Carthaginian Empire had been completely destroyed, and the city of Carthage itself was occupied. Carthaginian territories were annexed by Rome. Simultaneously, the Romans had brought Macedonian and the Greek states under their control. Thus, by the the 2nd century BC, the entire Mediterranean was directly or indirectly under the Romans. Then we will discuss after these two phases little bit political structure and society. What are the political structure of Roman Empire and what are the society of Roman Empire? The early Romans had kingship along the Senate and Assembly. The Senate widely many powers, and there were regular conflicts with the kings. In 510 BC, monarchy came to an end at Rome and republican state was established, which lasted till 27 BC. Membership of Senate was open only to the aristocracy people. Then social orders and the Senate. This is very important chapter. Here we will discuss the social orders. Roman society was marked by a prominent division of the inhabitant citizen into two orders. One is patrician, second one is plebeian order. The patrician basically constituted a small, close-knit hereditary elite. Elite peoples were there in patrician groups, while the plebeians were the very common peoples, very general peoples. Okay, however, both the orders were included in the category of citizens. Plebeian could not become a patrician just by acquiring wealth of political power, but the patrician were the economically, politically, socially dominated group in Roman society. They were very dominated peoples. Okay, and because the plebeians peoples are very normal, very common people, the patrician peoples are very aristocracy, elite type of peoples. Since the beginning of the republic, the Senate, which was the main organ of the state, was monopolized by the patricians. Only patricians male could be members of the Senate. The plebeian citizens and all women were excluded from it. In the early republic, the Senate had 300 members. If we will talk about the officials of the republic in Roman Empire, then definitely the highest official of the republic were two annually elected magistrates known as consuls. Okay, consuls. After the Senate, then one post is coming for the peoples, that is called consuls. They presided over the Senate and performed executive, judicial, and also military functions. It should be noted that the consuls were elected by an assembly of all the citizens, which included the plebeians, not only by the Senate. Consuls could seek re-election. Consuls could seek re-elections without any restrictions. Till 367 BC, only patricians could become consuls. But in 367 BC, following prolonged struggles, one of the consulship was thrown upon to the plebeians. The Roman Republic had several other elected migrants who looked after various aspects of governments. There were two very powerful magistrates called censors. See the position, one is Senate, second one is consuls, third one is censors. They were elected once in every 5 years and held office for 18 months at a time. This was very different from the modern concept of a census. It was confined only to the citizens of Roman Empire. And the censors recorded the names of citizens and the amount of property possessed by each citizens. Of course, the census determined the eligibility of a citizen depending upon the values of his property to hold various elective officials of the Roman state. Then if I will talk about the struggle between patrician and plebeians, because they both are always in against, because patricians peoples were not liking to the plebeian peoples due to very common type of people, so that this patrician peoples were always taking the highest position of the society. If we will talk about the struggle, then early republic was marked by a constant struggle between the landed aristocracy and the common people. While on the one hand, the patricians tried to concentrate all political power in their hands because they had lots of power, so that they were always tried to capture the political powers in their hand. Okay. On the other hand, the plebeians began to assert themselves and demanded that they should also have a say in the political process. The systems evolved by the patricians after the establishment of the republic completely denied the plebeians any say in the government. It is not difficult to see why the peasantry could not be easily ignored, because the Roman aristocracy had to seek the support of the peasantry for defending the city and subsequently for expansion in Italy. Then if I will talk about the assembly, then assembly has taken the most powerful position in Roman citizenship, basically the Roman Empire. Plebeians played in the Roman military structure. They were able to successfully organize themselves to struggle for their demands. The political systems of the city of Rome included a tribal assembly which had been in existence since the time of monarchy. The member of this assembly were all male adults of the tribes which originally inhabited Rome. Then Comitia Curiata. This is the name of Roman assembly. Okay, the assembly of all citizens was called Comitia Curiata. When the patricians assumed power and set up an oligarchical state, the Comitia Curiata more or less ceased to function. It continued to exist formally but had no real power. The Comitia Curiata was organized on the basis of kingship based social units called curia, into which original inhabitants of Rome were divided. In view of the inegalitarian nature of the Comitia Curiata, it could hardly be expected that this assembly would reflect the interest of the plebeians. As a result of growing pressure from the plebeians, the citizens were regrouped to form a new assembly. Then, after the Comitia Curiata, then one more assembly name is called Comitia Centuriata. Okay, this assembly was called Comitia Centuriata. And this is like the Comitia Curiata. Yes, it was an assembly of all Roman citizens, for all Roman citizens, patricians and plebeians, for the patrician and for the plebeians. The difference between the two organs lay in the manner in which the citizens were grouped. In the Comitia Centuriata, the citizens were grouped into centuries. Okay, a century was smallest unit of the Roman army and was technically supposed to consist. The largest number of centuries were placed in the first three classes, which were the classes of the aristocracy and the big landowners. Okay. Another thing is Concilium Plebis. Whereas the Comitia Curiata and the Comitia Centuriata were assemblies of all the Roman citizens, there was also an assembly consisting only the plebeians. This is only for the plebeians, not for the patricians. Okay. This plebeian assembly was known as Concilium Plebis. The Concilium Plebis discussed every type of issues of which concern the plebeians. What type? Many kind of issues, the things is going on about the plebeian peoples. It was there for discussing for the all matters in this assembly. Okay, it had regular procedures and elected its own officials. In 494 BC, the plebeians forced the Roman state to formally accepted two officials elected by the Concilium Plebis, known as tribunes. As spokesmen of the plebeians, the all responsibilities of the tribunes gradually multiplied, leading to an increase in the number of officials with this title. By 448 BC, there were 10 tribunes. Sometimes we have seen some conflict in the orders. Okay, in the traditions of the history of ancient Rome, the 2 centuries or so from 510 to 287 BC are referred to as period of conflict of the orders, conflict of the orders. During this time, we have seen the conflict of the orders. Basically, one of the foremost demands of the plebeians was that there should be a written code of law, so that there was no arbitrary exercise of judicial authority. In the absence of written laws, the all patricians had consistently abused the judicial powers. Everywhere the patricians were taking the opportunities due to the lack of laws, due to the lack of systems. The plebeians threatened the Senate that they would not perform military service. The plebeians threatened the Senate they would not perform the military service if it not initiate steps to create a proper legal framework for the Roman state. So that the plebeian peoples were always thinking good for the Roman Empire, for the common people, how they will live well. But the patrician peoples were very selfish nature. They were always thinking only themselves. Okay, they were not liking to the plebeian peoples. So the second landmark was the provisions whereby out of the consulships was opened to the plebeians in 367 BC. Okay, the actual election of the plebeian to the post of consul came much later, since the consuls were elected by the Comitia Centuriata. Hmm. Much and consuls were elected by the Comitia Centuriata, and the names of the candidates had to proposed by senators. It was not easy for the plebeian to be elected to the highest magistracy of the Roman state. Another point is coming here for this conflict. Another crucial reform was introduced in 326 BC, that is, Roman law had a very harsh provisions which related the strict enforcement of formal contracts or nexum. If a Roman entered into a formal agreement of nexum, its nexum is called a agreement, okay, while contracting a loan in which the debtors persons was pledged as security. Failure to honor the agreement resulted in debt bondage. And the fourth one is coming here, the politically the most significant landmark in the conflict in the orders during the early republics was a step taken in 287 BC, which gave the plebeian tribunes full-fledged magistrate powers. There seems to have been a serious crisis at this stage, which culminated in another threat by the plebeians to withdraw from military service. And the last page is coming, that is very different social differentiation in plebeians. How they have social differentiated. At the beginning of the republic, most of the plebeians had been peasants. Plebeians peoples are very common people, very normal peoples. Basically, they are coming from peasants groups. By the late republic, the plebeian order had become socially differentiated. The plebeian elite had little in common with the rest of the plebeians and was no longer intercaste and the struggling for the rights of the peasantry. Then, of course, the question of land reform and assumed urgency not only due to the desperate condition of the assiduity, but also because without land peasants were unable to mobilize resources to render military service. Few conflicts also we have seen here, and also for expansion. Basically, the most important of this was the creation of professional army under individual commanders. Professional army under the individual commanders. These armies were loyal to their commanders. These commanders led campaigns for enhancing their powers and resources. The commanders which increased in their powers entered into the conflicts with each other as well as the Senate to control the republic. Then professional army and warlords. In the Roman Republic, small and holding peasants were the main strength of the army. These soldiers had to arrange their own weapons and better gear the desperate condition of peasants as discussed in the previous sections. The opposition to land redistribution and the rebuilding size and the assiduity class necessitated the immediate solution to the problem, and recruiting soldiers, landless citizens could not be made to render military service out of their own resources. So here also we will discuss little bit about the wars of expansion. Wars of expansion. The social and political developments at Rome in the late Republic coincided with major military campaigns in West Asia. Rome had been constantly intervening the affairs of the Western Mediterranean region and West Asia. Macedonia had been annexed. The Greek states had been forced to accept Roman supremacy. Western Anatolia had been organized as the province of Asia, and the Siduls had been defeated in war. Egypt was made a protectorate, and the Romans had to maintain a very large army in the east to order to consolidate their position and cruise resistance. In this way, the struggle of war lords with the Senate. Sometimes we have seen the struggle of war lords with the Senate. Basically,
Mr. Ranjan sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello. You are getting tired, and let us have a discussion. Okay.
Actually, sir, it is going to finish, sir.
Okay, you finish and give 15 minutes for discussion.
Okay, sir. Still, it has 40 minutes, 35 minutes, sir. 30 minutes.
Okay.
Slavery, sir. I will just discuss the slavery system, sir.
No, you are getting tired, no? So this is not an easy task to complete the things, because already half hour you have taken, you are getting tired. So that is why.
Okay, sir.
Break, and this break will be utilized for discussion.
Okay, sir.
So, hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
So, sir, just little confused I am. Actually, Bijay sir wrote some message in the chat box. Please enter your roll number. So every day we will put our roll number in the chat box.
Every day, because this is the attendance. It is sent to Delhi. This attendance
so
is sent to Delhi. Every day you have to write the enrollment number. Only enrollment number. Your enrollment number.
Okay, sir. But sir, actually, first day means I taken the class, but I did not put my roll number.
It's all right. Now you put it. Okay, it's all right. What is gone. So now
okay, sir.
You write your enrollment number every day while attending the online classes. Please make it sure that you are very much online, and your enrollment number. Write down your enrollment number so that it can be recorded.
Okay, sir. Actually, I put it. Okay, sir. Thank you.
So now it's a discussion time. Let us have a discussion. So if you have a question,
any questions?
If you have any question.
Hello. Hi, sir. I want to ask some question.
Okay.
Yes.
Sir, could you explain the administrative policy of the Darius I?
Darius I. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Administrative policies of Darius I.
Yes, sir. Yes.
The Darius I administration policy was very good. Then the other rulers, because he was always interested how to stabilize the political power and how to give more concentration to the armies. Therefore, they will live good. Therefore, they will strong for the enemies. So the Darius I's policy was always good for the all common peoples for his empire.
Actually, let me tell you one thing. Organization of army. His basic policy was focused on organization of army, because generally you'll find whether it is Greek or Persian or it is Egyptian, wherever you'll find they are aggressive and very aggressive towards. They follow the policy of expansionism. That means extensive power. They want empire to be extended at the cost of war. So that is why for extension of empire, they needed army, a strong army. And for strong army, there was a recruitment policy. There was a recruitment policy in the sense that organization of army. How to
Yes.
organize? Where to collect? Generally, the armies were collected or from young people, and these young people, they are martial arts. They were treated. They were given proper training in martial art. About martial
Yes,
art,
sir.
how to channel. Just I will give you an example like China. China, you'll find
Mhm.
they are very much expert in martial art, and this martial art is not a modern art. It is a very much
Mhm.
traditional art which developed since time immemorial. So,
Mhm.
like this, the Armenian or the Persian or the Egyptian, they are expansionistic. They believed in expansion of empire toward different directions of their empire, so that because they considered themselves as a warrior class, they considered themselves as a next to God. That is called divine power, divinity of power, and these that is why in order to give them respect or authority so that people will respect them, so they want to always looking for expansion or at the cost of other neighboring countries or neighboring kingdoms which arose around their empire. Even if you'll find even you'll find in Greek also divided into many small provincial states, and among the provincial states you will find how Athens and Sparta, in the story of Athens and Sparta, how there was crucial conflict between Athens and Sparta, and they both were strong contender, and they were fighting with each other in order to survive or in order to become more powerful and to show the world they are the more powerful. For example, another example is Alexander. Alexander, why he invaded India? He invaded India that to show that he is the only powerful ruler in the world, and if he will conquer India, so that means he achieved or his empire could reach India even if. So that is why all the even if all the in ancient period we find generally people are the rulers, they believed in expansionism or expansionism at the cost of aggressive warfare. For aggressive warfare, they want a strong or strong army which can fight against the neighboring states. So that is why organization of army was very much important. Where they will collect the army, they will collect the army either from the farmers, they will collect the army from the young people, and they will train them or they will train them how to fight against the neighbors, how to fight against the contenders. That was the policy, that was the organization of army. Then stability of administration. Because as you know, organization or a empire survives if you provide better political stability or better administrative stability in the empire, so that your empire can survive. Because if we have seen many empires in decline because of the political instability, there was a chaos, there was a lawlessness, there was a weak rulers, and these weak rulers could not sustain or could not survive, and because of the emergence of new color or new territorial powers around the states, so that is why there was a contender, there was a contending or there was a conflict around their I can say territorial empires. So that is why there was a bigger question arose that how to survive and how to fight, how to provide a better political stability in the Persian Empire. So that was Darius' policy. Darius' first policy was organization of army, political stability, and revenue administration, and an expansion policy of territorial expansion. These are the policies adopted by Darius I. But never after that, the successor could not succeed because they could not follow the policy of Darius I. And some are weak, and they do not take they do not you can say win the heart of their own people. And there was you find that was the reason that political stability it broke down. You know. So next question.
Mhm.
Do you understand or any more doubt? Please.
No, no, sir, I understand.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
thank you.
Then
Okay, okay.
any more question? Ask freely. Ask freely. This is the open platform. Uh, Sir is very much expert. I am also from history. Don't worry. I'll take
Any,
care of
Yes, sir, yes,
both of you. Will take care of your problems. Don't worry.
yes, sir.
okay, any questions from any units?
So, yes, sir, I want to ask another question.
Yes.
Uh, sir, is it important the dark age for the Greek civilization? Dark age.
Yes, of course, this is very important because
Hello.
this is the last phase of the because this is the last phase. Okay, the Greek civilization. This is the last phase.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The first phase was the Minoan civilization. Second was a Messenian civilization. Then the last phase, the Dark Age. And this phase has given lots of good things, lots of possibilities, lots of developments to the empire. So this is very important age of the, and the Iliad and Odyssey. These two epics has given lots of important things to this age. So this is also very important. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other question? Any more questions from the last 2 units?
Friends, do you have any question? Otherwise, because already 9 minutes left.
Okay, you just read thoroughly the all materials. Then it will be very easier
Yes,
to.
sir.
Okay.
I'll just give you a tip.
Sir,
As I am from history, I'll give you a tip because history believes in evidence, facts.
Yes.
You know,
yes, sir.
history
Mhm.
believes in
Mm.
evidence and facts. Otherwise, it will be fabricated. Anybody can be a
Mm.
historian. Anybody can be a fact of history. No, the fact is that the history believes in evidence, authenticity, and relevance. You know,
Yes.
so that is
Yes,
why
sir.
whenever you will take any example of any country or any empire, there must be some facts, there must be some evidence, there must be some records, so that we'll accept as a facts of history. You know, so
Mhm.
remember Indo-Greek, Indo-Persian. These are the very important chapters. Remember, Indo-Greeks and Indo-Persian. Indo-Greeks, they have good relation, and Indo-Persian, that means Indo-Iranian. You know,
Mm.
Iran is called Persia. Ancient name was Persia. So it has since time immemorial. So these India has a trade links with Persia as well as Greeks and Egypt. And later on, India has a contact with China. So it was a lateral
Yes.
development. But
Mhm.
ancient India, you'll find India had a good relation, trading or commercial relation with Persia and Greeks. So that you'll find in our culture, both countries you'll find. In Persia, if you go, if visit Persia or Iran, you'll find our traditional, our cultural, you can say characteristics of each nuances you'll find in Iran. And in India also, we have adopted some cultural nuances of Iran, both because of it developed, this interaction it developed because of trade links, because of commercial relation. It could be possible. So same thing, India also adopted many cultural nuances of the Greeks, and
Mhm.
Greek also they adopted Indian culture. So this interaction it could be possible because of the links, trade links, and trade links developed because trade links developed between India and Egypt, India and Greeks, and India and Persia. And both the countries, the traders of Persia, the traders of Greeks, and traders of India, they also had an interest to have a trade relation and to expand their trade horizon in different, you can say, for their better economy. You know, and the Indian traders, you'll find in the science, you can say, particularly, I'll give you one example how in Rome or in Greeks or in Persia, Indian spices are having a great demand. Once upon a time, even
Yes, yes.
even if India also exported the Indian spices to their countries. So you just imagine India, how Indians are export in trade and commerce during those days, and uh, these trading relation, it continued, or it has continued since time immemorial, and is still continuing. This process is continuing. It has not stopped. So you can say this trade relation. It led to cultural interaction between India and Greece, and India and Persia, or India Egypt. So these are you have to see, and always you remember that India is also a powerful country, a powerful kingdom. You see, during those days, you don't think that India was not so powerful. In every respect, India was strong. Economy, take the example of economy, take the example of poverty, take the example of religion, take the example of culture, take the example of art. In every respect, India was leading in. You can say it was the leader. But question is that it was one separate time that how India impacted cultural, or you can say India had a cultural impact on the foreign countries or foreign kingdoms, how the foreign kingdoms had a cultural impact on India. So this also you have to focus upon, so that you can
Mhm.
have a complete idea about the empire which developed in Greece, the empire which developed in Persia, and the empire which also developed, or the provincial states which also developed in India. Just see, I'll just highlight here how you see 16 Mahajanapadas, or how it existed in India, and how the territorial empire, or territorial empire, it also started emerging in ancient India also. You know, so gradually it will take time, but one by one we'll discuss things. If you have any question, friends.
No, no, sir.
Okay. So Bishoy sir,
Yes, sir.
how many units left today's class?
Still, sir, six units, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. Because
Six.
this is, you see, history. If you elaborate, it will take minimum 1 year to complete. Okay.
No, no,
History
sir.
is
We will complete very soon.
just because as I know, I'm from history,
Yes,
so
sir.
I know if you elaborate all the concepts, all the facts, all the components in detail, it will take minimum 365 days. I'm telling you, because
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
that is why what Bisway sir he is doing is excellently explaining or touching upon all the important points. So that it can be analyzed in the class, and you just take a note of it and note down of which we do not understand. For example, somebody asks that Darius one, somebody asks that political stability, somebody asks that organization of army, somebody asks that Indo-Persian relationship, how it developed in ancient India. Somebody asked that Indo-Greek relationship, how it developed, and how the empire, how the both territorial empires in territorial kingdoms in Greece and Persia, how there was a conflict, internal conflict, how this internal conflict it led to the never or it led to the aggressive warfare against the India. So these are the important components of the important topics of discussion. So don't worry, and tomorrow we'll have a class at the same time at 10 a.m. And if you have
Yes,
further
sir.
question, you can ask. Okay, friends,
Okay, sir.
will you ask any question? Those who are online,
Yes, sir.
you ask question,
Sir,
please. Yes,
sir, how Cyrus construction of Anatolia?
yes, yes. You just
Yes, sir.
Anatolia, how it is.
Yes, yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Hello.
You repeat the question.
Hello.
Repeat the
Sir,
question. How?
how Cyrus
Ah,
constructed of Anatolia?
Okay, his question is that how Cyrus constructed Anatolia.
Yes, sir.
how Cyrus constructed?
Yes.
Again, just repeat the question.
How Cyrus constructed of Anatolia?
Okay. The Anatolia that time, that was very center point. Okay, so that place was very center point, and that place was very demandable. So that he was interested to tackle that place. He was interested to capture that place. If he will capture that place, then it will be good for him as well as to the empire. So that he was always interested. He was always trying to capture that place, Anatolia. Anatolia is very good place during that time. Okay,
Yes, there is a central location. It was,
central location. Yes.
if you see the geographical location, Anatolia is a nearest, is a central place which connect to the sea, which connect to, it's a trading, you can say it is a central or focal point for trade and commerce.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so that time, if any place which is famous for trade and commerce, immediately it will be attractive for the empire, for a ruler. So how to capture it? Because during that time, basically the emperors or the rulers or the provincial governors, whoever it may be, so their main target was to how to capture the important places, the places which are meant for trade and commerce, or which was famous for trade and commerce. So generally, their main target was to capture those points. As a result, their empire, if that point or that kingdom was added or annexed to their empire, so that their empire will be richer, and the empire, their economy, because they will collect revenue from that empire, conquered empire. So that their economy prosper, their economy will be better. So that is why it is called aggressive annexes. It is a policy of annexation. It's a policy of expansionism. You know. So if any provincial state which was famous for trade and commerce, capture them. That was a policy adopted by the any ruler of the particularly, whether it may be applicable to Persia, it may be applicable to Greece, it may be applicable to Egypt, because Anatolia is a focal point. It was famous for trade and commerce. So that is why each and every emperor, they wanted to capture that point, so that it will be annexed to the empire and revenue will be generated and it will be collected, so that their economy will be better. Any more question?
No. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So Biswajit sir, thank you very much for your, really, it is a hard task for you.
Okay,
So
sir. Thank you.
I
Thank you, sir.
understand, because it's a very difficult unit, and it is a
Yes,
very
sir, yes.
difficult medieval, ancient and medieval, particularly Egyptian civilization, whether it may be Greek civilization, whether it be a Persian civilization, Chinese civilization, very difficult, because you have
Sir,
to remember.
actually-
You
Sir,
have to-
actually, it needs lots of time, sir. It
lot of
needs some time.
Yes, in
Yes,
a
sir.
short notice, because it is because I remember in a short notice you accepted my proposal and agreed, and no resource person agreed, because there are so many students in history in Odisha, but nobody
Yes.
accepted this challenge. But I acknowledge your responsibility and the responsibility you have taken. So thank you very much on behalf of the regional center, on behalf of me also. I convey my gratitude and convey my congratulations to all the participants who are really patiently hearing and listening to you and interacting with you. So thank you very much once again. I welcome you, and at the same time, and you will have an interactive class at 10 a.m. sharp. Please don't forget and convey this information to your friends, so that your friends, those who have missed the class, today's class, they can join tomorrow and they can have an interaction with you, the resource person. So with these words, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Both are, sir. Thank you. Have a nice day, sir.